You're watching this video, so the chances are great that you enjoy what we create here at the Audrain. And if you do, why not take the next step and subscribe to this channel? You might also consider a membership in the Audrain Automobile Museum. We mount 4 new exhibitions each year featuring cars from the Audrain collections and loans from some of the leading collectors and institutions around the world. Click here to find out more. So Jay, you'll be happy to know that today's tenuous connection is much, much less so than in many of our other episodes.
Exactly. You know, I did all those episodes just so I could get to drive this car. Because this was the dream car when I was 15 years old. It was in road and track and car and driver, the black and white photo, parked next to other sports cars, and it was lower and leaner looking. You know, I love the whole idea behind it, you know, the 60s rebellion idea and what they call the Paris Revolt, when Bizzarrini and all the other engineers walked out of Ferrari, they didn't like the way they're being treated, and decided to build their own cars like the ATS and like this.
Exactly.
This was probably the most successful of those. Just a fascinating automobile. I was fortunate enough to have Mr. Bizzarrini come to my garage. He didn't speak Italian.
You didn't speak Italian. You didn't.
I mean, I didn't speak Italian. He didn't speak English. So it's a lot of a lot of that. But I think I got my point across. And yeah, that was quite an honor. I took him for a ride in my 8-liter Bentley, and he seemed to get a kick out of that. And I realized at that time he was probably just a few years younger than I am now, and I thought he was really old then. So.
Well, Giotto Bizzarrini is, and he remains a vibrant man today.
Yeah.
At, I think he's nearly 90.
Yeah.
And this car, this is a 1968 Bizzarrini 5300 GT Strada, and it tells such a wonderful story about what is possible when the imagination can be realized. Because this is, of course, a great hybrid car.
Right.
With a 327 Corvette V8 engine in it, and yet it is so much more than the 67 Corvette.
Well, than the sum of its parts, as you'd say.
Exactly.
Right? You know, the interesting thing is, this is one of those cars I passed on. I remember seeing one for $125,000 when a Countach was $80,000. I thought, well, that's crazy. And I said, I'm going to wait till the price comes down. And I said to myself, you know, I'm going to spring for it. But by that time, the price had risen to $250. I go, well, I'm not paying $250. I'm going to wait until the price comes down. And then when I thought, all right, I pay $250. No, then it was $500,000, and then it was out of reach.
Exactly. The price is nicely settled down to $1.5 million.
Yeah,
for a good
that's
example.
about where we are now, because now they are seen as Leonardo da Vinci's. They're works of art. And so consequently, you have people buying them for all kinds of different reasons.
Well, I think the best reason to buy one of these cars is to do what you're doing right now, which is driving it. And we're both fans of the C2 Corvette. And to imagine a C2 Corvette with a front mid-engined mounted engine, this incredibly beautifully tuned Bizzarrini chassis, and the fact that one of these cars, the racing version, of course, actually won its class at Le Mans in 1965, and came 9th overall in the race.
Right.
And it's an amazing thing because I'd like to think that this is the car that the GM engineers would have built had GM actually given them the money to do it.
Well, you say to yourself, they really couldn't have, because already I'm feeling the searing heat coming through the transmission tunnel. I mean, it is a cool day today here in Newport. I have a jacket on, but I am starting to sweat profusely because you've got an engine literally
in the compartment with us.
2 feet from my face. And the heat coming off this transmission tunnel is unbelievable.
So you have done a wonderful job of setting up the story of the house we're going to see today.
Okay.
Because this is a story of transformation.
Right.
Taking something that was this and making it something completely different.
All right.
Think of this as a 1967 Corvette 327.
Right.
But totally clothed in a different way and presented in a completely new way.
Right.
The house we're going to see, Rockcliffe, is exactly that.
Well, to me, the house is merely a place to store the car. So what we're gonna see where the car would live.
So this Bizzarrini was as amazing for you to drive as it is to look at, and of course it's all about where that engine sits.
Yeah, that's really the exciting part about this. It reminds me, I've got an SLR, which is a front mid-engine, as they say, but this is really front mid-engine. Look at that. I mean, you literally need to reach the distributor and the spark plug from here through
Exactly,
the
a little
dashboard.
hatch in the dashboard. And how low this car is also amazing. You know, the Ford GT40 is named being 40 inches tall. This is 42 inches tall.
Right, right.
It's
and leave it to the Italians to make one of the easiest to work on cars, the Corvette, the hardest to work on. I mean, it's just to reach the battery, to reach anything in here is tough. But you know, you can feel it on that one turn. You feel the car pivot on its axis right here.
right here. But let's close this up and let's talk a little bit about the house that we're here.
Okay, sounds good.
So the house we're standing in front of right now, Rockcliffe, actually only has had that name since 1935. It was originally built in 1887, designed by George Champlin Mason, a prolific Newport architect.
Now, who was it built for?
It was built for T.F. Cushing in 1887 originally, and it was a very, very different house. It was a Tudor revival house, timber framed with lots of gables and a wonderful wraparound porch, a porte cochere for the carriages, and it was transformed also by George Champlin Mason in 1910 for Blair Fairchild, who was the son-in-law of Cushing, who inherited the house. And he had it rebuilt in this Georgian style. So it's quite remarkable. Again, my tenuous connection always at play. Just as theoretically it's a Corvette underneath that Bizzarrini, there is an Italianate
That is tenuous.
Tudor revival house underneath this very elegant, symmetrical Georgian house.
The way it's fun, I like my houses like my motorcycles, like to be able to see through them. Like when I look at a Harley or a Vincent, I can see through the fins what's on the other side. And when I open the front door of this house, I can see all the way through the house the ocean. You know,
Exactly.
I like that when I can see through something yet still be aware of its surroundings. As opposed, so many motorcycles now just have a fairing, and you can't. I like to be able to see light and see what's on the other side of it. That makes it. Like, to me, there's nothing sectioned at Vincent because the engine hangs in the frame, so there's no lower tube. It just looks like it's being suspended in midair, yet you can see through it between the fins, which is kind of cool.
It is also very interesting that you mentioned that because, of course, this is also rebuilt by Mason at a time when houses were beginning to open themselves up to the view, as opposed to the houses that were built in the 1860s and 1870s that were really sort of, they could have been in a town. You know, they had closed windows, small windows, and all that. Now the houses are now opening themselves up to this incredible view.
I assume that probably had a lot to do with the fact that glass was becoming stronger, sturdier, thicker. When I look at some of the early homes here, it almost looks like Hollywood breakaway glass. It's so thin, it looks like if you tapped it, it would just shatter.
So now we're talking about the way that this house was completely transformed by the maker, and let's talk about another transformation of parts. The hot rod sitting in front of us appears to be a 1929 Ford, and indeed that's what the body is, but
Right.
it's a 1929 Ford on a 1929 Packard frame. Let's take a closer look.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because you say it as if the guy was looking for a Packard frame. I mean, this is built, or it was built the way most hot rods are built. You went to a junkyard, you found, oh, there's a frame, let's use that. And maybe later you found out it was a Packard, but you wanted something that's the right length, and you can see it's been drilled in areas for lightness. And then you put the engine in, then you find a Ford body or whatever. It's all amalgamation of parts. Those things age out. So
Yeah.
pretty soon the idea of a 32 Ford grill wouldn't mean anything, because you didn't grow up with it. I mean, it's what, we were kids, that was the look to have. But if you're 25 years old now, maybe you wanted to look like Star Wars. I don't know. Whatever was happening in your childhood, you know.
I think that there are still young people that appreciate the old school rods.
Right,
but
right.
It's again fascinating, the idea of taking these parts and transforming it into something else at the heart of hot rodding, which is at the heart of today's tuner crowd today.
Right.
It's taking an object and parts and materials and putting them together in a compelling way. Now, the question is the sum of the parts greater than the parts themselves?
Well, I'll be curious to see. I mean, you know, not a lot of people have truly driven in an old car, and this is a classic old car. A lot of old cars now have disc brakes and all these other things. This has the original brakes, original chassis, probably something close to the original suspension system. So I don't think it's going to be a day at the beach, but I think it'll be fun.
We'll find out. We'll
Let's give it
drive
a
to the
shot.
beach and find out.
Let's go.
Well, Jay, the ultimate in transformations has got to be any hot rod. And so the idea that you take all these parts that we talked about before we got into the car and put them all together in a way that's very individual
Yeah.
is the heart of hot rodding.
Yeah, it's funny. It's still hard for me to believe that in the 60s, when I was a teenager, this would be like hot rodding a car from the early 2000s. You know,
Right, exactly.
Because it seems so far away. I mean, World War II might as well have been the Civil War.
Yeah.
If you were a teenager and you were born after 1950.
It is that thing that when people say they don't understand the tuner crowd, and yet they understand hot rods like this and
Right.
you know, some of the muscle car work in the 1970s, it's exactly the same thing.
I mean, it's funny when you watch old movies, Hot Rods to Hell and all those
Yeah.
old movies. Guys would be hitting 70 miles an hour. Da, 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 da. The speedometer's going like that, you know, and that thing's going like a bat out of hell. You know, the cops are trying to chase them.
Exactly.
And they're really barely doing the speed limit.
The cops in their nice Studebaker police cars, Studebaker Commander police cars, and they're trying to outrun the guy in the hot rod Ford. A vehicle like this is actually it's his recent build, but I think what I really like about this Ford is that it's got the spirit of the old builds. You know, the only concession to modernity is this modern Ford C4 transmission.
Right, right.
And frankly, I think I have an idea while driving this why they went with the auto transmission. With this very upright bench seating position and the position of the wheel, there's not a lot of room actually to operate your clutch leg.
Well,
And,
also, they did it because they could.
yeah,
I mean, you know, the mid-60s was the first time that an automatic transmission was faster than a manual shift. The torque flight was considered unbelievable, and people didn't believe that a 426 automatic could be the 426 4-speed.
Yeah.
I mean, you literally had to take them to the drag strip and show them. And
it was such a huge deal that suddenly the automatic was seen as, oh, maybe this is the future of racing, you know? And of course the purists never believed it was.
Yeah.
And to this day they still don't. But I think it's fairly evident that the automatic transmission is way better than anybody could. So if you were building this in period, you might say to yourself, let me go with the best transmission available.
Well, it's also interesting to me because, again, I am no engineer and no mechanic, but the fact that this 1940 flathead Ford matches so well this 1980s, 1960s certainly, Ford transmission.
Right.
You know, that to me is quite interesting. And also the characteristics of the flathead. Everybody loves the flathead engine, the unique way it sounds, and actually also the way it delivers power, I think is something that people need to experience. Think about the fact this is an engine from the 1930s, you know?
Yeah, and I like the fact, with the exception of the automatic, you know, I hate when I go to a hot rod show and there's a brand new crate 350 Chevy.
Right.
And it's got the tilt-away wheel and it's got electric windows. Well, no, it's a hot rod. It's supposed to be built in the cheapest possible way.
Exactly, with whatever you have hanging around and available, yeah.
You know, Ken Gross, our friend, the journalist,
oh, yeah,
he knows how to build a hot rod because he actually looks for 1930s and 1940s parts and mates them all together exactly as they would have done it back in the day.
Yeah, that's what the builder of this car did. I mean, you know, it's got the Ford power plant, the Edelbrock heads, the Stromberg triple carburetors, you know. It's everything that somebody would have done back in the day. And as an involving driving experience, it certainly hits the spot. There's not a moment you can have of inattention.
Right.
The tires want to go in one direction, the body wants to go in another direction, and it makes every curve dead man's curve.
Right, right. But it's a fun car at 40 miles an hour. You get the feeling that you're not, you know.
Exactly. And of course, you know, even steering the car, it's really most convenient to use this. It's easy to steer on the necker knob than it is to turn the wheel.
Now we call them suicide knobs.
Well, you know, they have different names. I mean, I think the necker knob is the fact that you can steer the car with one hand while doing other things with the other.
Right, you can put your arm around or whatever.
But, you know, there's enough of those articles about Jay Leno and his partner out there, so
that's
we
right,
really
exactly.
need to do that. But the next car we're going to drive is going to be a very interesting variation on that very theme. Taking something that is stock and very entertaining and turning it into something vastly different. Again, much like our cottage became Rockcliffe. Obviously, this is the beginning of the Porsche company, the 356.
Right.
And this 1956 356A looks like a high-performance version, perhaps a street race car, but it hides something rather more modern underneath. Again, just like our house.
Right, right. Well, this is built by Rod Emory. You know, when you know the builder, it changes your whole perspective of the car, because there are a lot of people who build things that just they're not experts. In other words, maybe they're a designer and they're building an engine and it doesn't quite work out. Rod has experience going back, well, his grandfather is the guy who coined the term outlaw.
Outlaw.
You know.
To take something of great quality and of great build and transform into something even better is a special gift. And we'll see if Rod Emory's work equals that of George Templin Mason's on this house.
I think
Go for a ride.
I think it's gonna.
So Jay, in this case, what is hidden beneath hasn't been disguised because we're still in a Porsche,
Right.
identifiably a Porsche. But unlike the house, which is totally transformed in its recreation, this has been transformed underneath.
True.
So it looks like a 1956 Porsche 356A.
Well, you know, a lot of people go after the purists, oh, you've ruined the car. But I always say Porsches are expensive, but they're not rare. They built millions of them, and many of them, although not too many are rotting in sheds anymore, but there are some that are perhaps beyond redemption, although if you believe, for those that believe nothing is beyond redemption. So the fact that you modify it to your own taste, I see nothing wrong with that.
Well, and also what has been done to this car, all of it could be reversed if someone wants a stock 60 horsepower 356A. You know, nothing's been cut out of the car.
You know, it's funny, if someone was handicapped and you adapted the car with hand controls and different things and an automatic for them to drive, no one would fault you, you know.
Yeah.
But if you would take it and you adapt it to your own particular handicaps or what you like, oh, that's a terrible thing, you know what I mean? I don't know if that's a good analogy or not.
Well, it's an interesting one, and the question that always comes up in mind is, do the modifications somehow suit or respect or relate to the original build? I mean, obviously, Porsche 356s are terrific, great cars. They built a great reputation for a reason, and it's not as if this is, you know, an LS swap.
Right.
We've got all Porsche mechanicals here, but combined in a different and new way.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You and I are of a generation who grew up with the cars, so there's a nostalgic feeling, and we understand what they do. If you're under the age of 30 and you get in a car from this era, you're astounded at how hard it is to stop. You go, oh my God, I've got to apply all this pressure.
Yeah.
How hard it is to turn. I mean, just because you never lived through it at the time. So consequently, it's like a Model T. You don't relate to it. Model Ts are the same price now as they were 30 or 40 years ago because nobody relates to them anymore. You know, there's no, oh, I remember this. You know, when I was a kid, I kind of remember old guys with Model Ts, so when I get in one, it reminds me of being a kid in that era. But if you're 13 or 14 now, you have no connection to a Model T. It might as well be from Mars.
And of course, the interesting thing is, we were talking about chassis dynamics. The fact that there are chassis that are designed by engineers that can take far more power than the original manufacturers gave them. Now, this is not exactly that case because Rod Emory does a really terrific job, sort of much like Carroll Shelby. It's not just sticking a bigger motor in, it's also adapting everything else to suit that engine. So, you know, we've got the 911 independent rear suspension rather than the swing axles of the 356, which with this much power would be fairly scary. And the ventilated disc brakes and all the things that we sort of come to expect in a modern GT car.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say, in the old days, you just made the car faster. Now you make it faster, safer, quieter, handle better, more fuel efficient, or even certainly more environmentally friendly.
Well, this car's all those things except for quieter. It certainly isn't quieter.
Yeah, quieter.
It is a fantastic thing, and again, the idea that imagination and taste can recreate something that is totally different than the original, but as good, if not better, in its own way.
And as much as I love the Bizzarrini, this is much easier, much more relaxing. Dare I say, maybe more fun to drive because you've got a power ratio that's almost equal.
So no matter what the transformation might be, whether it's a hot rod, an Italian-American hybrid, or a Porsche brought to its ultimate specification. I think that change and evolution can be a great thing. Don't you agree?
Oh no, I agree with you. I agree with you.